Hey everyone, this is UV with the Black Bank. This is the second part with Frankie, and we'll be talking about his life incarcerated since 16. I do want to make sure that you roll onto the second part, 2.5, to finish the whole entire video. Due to the sensitive content of this one-on-one conversation, listener discretion is advised. To talk about when you were 16 and your life incarcerated were you in for 30
for first degree murder.
And for 30 years, right?
27 years.
Okay, 27 years. Okay.
27 years, 3 months, and 8 days.
Man, you count
not,
those
not
days.
that I was counting.
Not that you're counting.
Yeah.
So for that, I mean, maybe start off with, like, at the age of 16, what was that moment that you realized you were going to be in for that long?
So, at 16, it was really hard to digest what was going on. You know, I was, not as an excuse, but I was intoxicated when I committed the murder. So, I didn't have a full grasp of the situation. I remember I went to juvenile hall first, and it was a very intimidating experience because I'd never been incarcerated, nor had I ever had a reason to think I would be incarcerated. And I remember the process of going through the juvenile hall where, you know, they strip you out and they put you in the shower to like disinfect you. And then they give you like these, you know, drab gray pants and a t-shirt and these shoes that look like Converse, but they're not Converse. They're like, they call them bubble gums because they're like all blown up in the front.
Yeah.
And I just felt so disconnected from the process. It was like so surreal that I couldn't believe like I was where I was at. And it still really wasn't even registering to me. But they took me, when you're incarcerated for murder as a juvenile, the first 3 days you're incarcerated, they put you in the hole on suicide watch. And so I went to the little hole in Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. And I'll never forget, there was this little kid. He was probably about 8 years old. And I found out later on he'd been through juvenile hall his whole life, which is sad. But he was standing out in the hallway when I came in with my little bedroll. And, you know, I'm 16. I wasn't big at 16. I was 5'4", 125 pounds. And this kid had to be maybe 4'7", 4'8", maybe 90 pounds. And he looked at me and he said, "I'm going to kick your ass." and I believe he believed it. And that kind of made me believe it. Like, this little 8-year-old kid is just a terror. So it was kind of like a wake-up call to where I was at. Like, even at that young of an age, people were just rawing off the hook. And it was kind of scary to see this kid that, like, I didn't say a word to him. I just looked at him and he wanted to kick my ass. So I spent, let's see, that was in December. I spent till about March or April at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall before I was tried as an adult. And basically what that means is at the age of 16, the state of California at that time could try a minor as an adult for their conviction or for their sentence. And I was transferred to Central Juvenile Hall. And now in juvenile hall, I mean, it's still kids, but kids function on a different level when you bring gangs into the picture. And it's very much based on gang affiliation in juvenile hall. There's a lot of fighting, and then little cliques. You know, your first couple days, you're tested, especially if you're from a gang and you have enemies that are there from rival gangs. You have certain days that you have to fight. And if you don't fight, then you're looked down upon. You know, you're a punk or you're a bitch or whatever they want to call you. Yeah. But in any form of incarceration, perception matters. How people see you matters to your survival in incarceration. Yeah. So even if you don't want to fight, the peer pressure or the thought of being shunned or, you know, pushed to the side will make you fight, even if you don't want to. So I was in a few fights in juvenile hall, and I've never been a person that wanted to hurt other people or fight with other people, but I've also never been a person that was going to allow someone to put their hands on me. So while I never threw the first punch, I at that time was more than happy to throw the second one. So I spent about a year in juvenile hall, and December of 1992, I pled guilty to my conviction, and I went to YA, and I did a 90-day evaluation. And I frequently tell people that the incarceration and the stages I've been through, it's kind of like school. You know, you go to elementary school, you go to junior high school, then you go to high school, and then some go on to college. Juvenile hall is definitely elementary. YA is junior high school. The county jail would be high school, and then the penitentiary would be college. And you get an education accordingly along the way.
You went through all those 4 stages.
Actually, no, I never went to the county jail, believe it or not, because I was 16 when I was incarcerated. Although I was tried as an adult, I was still housed in juvenile hall because I was still 16, 17 years old. And then I went to YA at 17 years old. I did my 90-day evaluation, and they decided when I was in YA that I was too sophisticated for my peer group, which is ironic because at the same time they said I was susceptible to influences of older people. So they said, I'll never forget this because I didn't find out till years later, but in the psych evaluation, the psych from my youth authority from YA said that, you know, Mr. DeLeo would be susceptible to rehabilitation. Like we could save this guy, you know, to lock him up with a more sophisticated criminal element and his desire to be accepted. He'd be easily influenced. You'd be basically throwing this guy away. So, needless to say, YA kicked me out of YA and they sent me to the penitentiary at 17 years old.
Oh, wow. And that's
which,
at the top. That's at the top, right?
Yeah, you just skipped high school and went straight to college.
Oh, okay.
And unfortunately, I'm not the only one that's been through that. CDC did that to a lot of youth offenders. There's a lot of guys that were on the main line level 4 with a life sentence at 17 years old. Yeah. And I mean, at that age, you're barely old enough to drive. You're not old enough to vote. You can't drink, but you can go do an adult sentence in the penitentiary, which pretty much everywhere in the country is the worst place anyone wants to be. Yeah. You know, so especially as a kid, it was pretty hard to digest. And exactly like they said, you know, I was wanting to be accepted by my peers. You know, I was affiliated with Southern gangs in LA, and I acted accordingly when I got to prison. And, you know, the gang culture in prison isn't exactly known for cultivating scholars. You know, they're trying to make soldiers and warriors and little torpedoes. Yeah. But it was actually kind of ironic. I was like a novelty when I got to the yard. I landed in Chino in September 1993. I was still 17 years old. Chino was still a reception center back then. And these guys thought it was just the neatest thing that this 17-year-old kid was on the yard. You know, and I remember they walked me around, introducing me to everyone, like, hey, check out this kid. He's here with us. And I was just so overwhelmed by, like, when you walked into Chino at that time, you could sense death and power in the prison. There was a lot of high-ranking gang members that were in the hole in Palm Hall in Chino, and the power that they had oozed out into all the housing units. And you could feel it. It was really intimidating. My first day in the penitentiary, I don't know if I should say this because it's really inappropriate, but it's the reality that I went through. When I walked into my housing unit, the correctional officer looked at me and he said, "Damn, how old are you?" Like, you could see I was just a kid. And I said, "I'm 17. He said, "Wow." He said, "Have you ever been to prison before?" And I was like, "No." He said, "Man, well, you look a little scared." And I was like, "Well, I kind of am." And he said, "Okay, well, let me tell you a joke to make you feel better." He said, "A 17-year-old kid gets to prison. He's really scared. He don't know what to expect. So he walks down to a cell and walks in the cell, and his cellie sees him and says, 'Hey, are you new here?' The kid says, 'Yeah, I'm your cellie.' He said, 'All right, well, come on in. You know, close the gate.' He said, 'Since you've never been to prison before, I'm gonna tell you how it works.' He said, 'Each cell runs like a household, and in the household you have a husband and you have a wife.' He said, 'And since you're new, I'm gonna let you choose whether you want to be the husband or the wife.' And the kid says, 'Well, I want to be the husband.' And the guy says, 'Okay, that's a good choice. Now get over here and suck your wife's dick.' And the cop starts laughing. He just thought this was hysterically funny, and he's just rolling. And I'm looking at him like, are you serious? Like, this is the joke you want to tell me. Like, I have no idea what to expect here. And I was just blown away. Like, I couldn't believe the insensitivity to the fact that there's a kid standing in front of you. And this is like, he disconnected me from humanity. Like, I'm not a kid, I'm an inmate, and go. So he said, you live up on the second tier. Now, Chino's built 3 tiers high, right? 3 different stories. He said, you live down on the second tier. He said, go up the front stairs. Don't ever use the back stairs. Only use the front stairs. You're about halfway down. So I said, okay. So I go up the front stairs, and I take maybe 5 steps onto the tier, and I see a Mexican Southern gang member, and he's got his hands through the bars, and he's holding on to someone in the cell, and he's slashing him with a razor blade. And the guy in the side of the cell is screaming bloody murder. And I immediately turned around and went back down the stairs. And I walked all the way across the bottom tier, and I went up the back stairs that the cop told me not to use, because I wasn't going to walk by where this guy was slicing him. And I came back down the tier from the other end, and the guy had already ran off to his cell or whatever. And I went inside my cell. My cell door was open. I walked in. I closed the door. And my cellie at the time, his name was Pete. He said, wow, did you see that? And I was like, I didn't see anything. I didn't see shit. I don't know anything. And he started laughing. And he said, you're going to be all right, kid. You're going to be all right. That was my very first day in prison. Wow. And I was like, that morning, I was with kids my age, NYA. We were playing softball. And that night, I'm in the penitentiary. I've already seen someone get stabbed. I see how callous the cops can be. And I was just like, oh, my God, this just really got real.
Did you, let's just say, did you kind of go in with maybe not an idea of, or maybe like, okay, I'm going to be fine. You're scared, but did you think, did you have a different vision before you actually saw that, especially on
I'm sorry, I just totally lost you right there.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you kind of froze.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think my internet's kind of slow, but hopefully, if you can't hear me, you could just put your hand up or something.
Okay.
So what I wanted to ask is that, did you have a different vision going into prison versus comparing it to your very first day?
Well, I don't think you ever envisioned seeing someone get stabbed your first day in prison. Yeah. No, I really didn't have no vision or expectations. The only thing I knew was I wasn't going to be a victim. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to be somebody's punk. I'm not going to be fucked with. I'm just not. I will get beat down until I can't breathe no more. But I'm not going to surrender to this place. Like, I knew I was in over my head. Yeah. But one thing I've found throughout my life is I've always been able to adapt and overcome. I've always, like, even with self-doubt there, I was still always able to. And I didn't think that this would be any different. I just knew I had to figure out how.
Yeah. Was it more of like trying to survive every day? Because it seemed like there's a lot of violence. And, I think that many of us have watched like shows or have watched a lot of TV shows that kind of involve that kind of life in prison. And I'm just thinking, I wonder if it's similar. But as you're talking, I'm like, man, that must have been tough. And I wonder if it's kind of like the mindset of like, I got to wake up and like play that I'm going to survive today, and I'm going to be like good, and I'm going to like push through today. Was it like that?
Okay, so here's the thing. The image that the media, movies portray about prison isn't an accurate portrayal. Mm-hmm. I mean, sure, there's violence, there's victimization, but prison's a subculture that's part of America that America doesn't realize exists. Yeah. I mean, this is a set environment. There's rules and regulations set in place. Violence doesn't just randomly happen in prison. Yeah. People aren't just randomly made victims. I mean, some people, sure, they're just not cut from the cloth that it takes to survive in prison. But for the most part, prison's a very structured environment. Prison's one of the most respectful places in society. And sometimes that respect is a genuine respect, and sometimes that's a fear-based respect. But nonetheless, people don't cross the line with each other because of the I'm looking for the right word, But basically, because of the consequences that could come with it, some people will try to kill you for cutting in front of them in the chow hall line or in the canteen line, or for not getting off their phone when it's their phone time. You use too much of their time. So people toe the line, if not because they genuinely function from a place of respect, because they fear the consequences if they don't. And it's a very structured environment, and it's segregated. Prison is racially segregated, and it's segregated geographically by gangs. So there's a lot of structure within those segregations that is not only there to keep them safe, but to also keep you safe.
Yeah.
So if you're Mexican and you're from Southern California, then Mexicans from Southern California are going to embrace you, and you're going to follow our rules, and you're going to follow our regulations, and you fall under this rule or this structure. And if you get out of line, we'll take care of you. And if other segments of the prison mess with you, we got your back.
Yeah.
And it's very much structured like that.
Yeah. And it's interesting that with media and every kind of situation throughout life, there's always it's portrayed differently. And so people start having this mindset of like, oh, I know what it's like. It's this, and that. But no one really knows unless they're in it. So for you to distinguish that, it's kind of good, because it's like a lot of people do have these like stereotypes. They just kind of assume a lot based off media.
I think a lot of people are really intrigued by prison, and they want to know as much as they can about it. They just don't want to visit it. They don't want to go there. So if I could watch this through Locked Up Raw or whatever way they want to present it to me, I'm all in.
Yeah.
But the truth is I mean, don't get me wrong. There's bad people in prison. There's people that do terrible things to each other in prison. But for the most part, prison as a whole is very structured, and it's ran with precision. Most people, especially as a lifer coming out, I'm a creature of habit. My everyday was structured, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And when it didn't go in that order, I was like, okay, what now? Something's wrong. It's not supposed to be like this. So you become programmed. I used to call it Groundhog Day. It was like that movie with Bill Murray. It was Groundhog Day. We lived the same day over and over. At this time, the door's going to open. At this time, we're going to go eat. At this time, we're going to come back. At this time, we're going to go to the yard. At this time, I'm going to go to work. At this time, I'm going to come back. I'm going to shower. They're going to count me at this time. They're going to lock my door at this time. And in between, all those moments in between, it's usually very respectful. But I will say this: when the shit hits the fan, the shit hits the fan.
Yeah. But with you being in for 27 years, was there ever a point while you were incarcerated that you realized like maybe you wanted to do something different, or you kind of started seeing things differently?
So from 1993, when I got to the penitentiary, till about 2010, I had no direction. I used to go out to the yard. I'd play sports with my homeboys. If there was some escalation going to happen on the yard, I would participate if it was a riot or whatnot. I don't want to ever glorify any violence. I don't want to glorify any form of gang. I'm not proud of any of the things that happened while I was in prison. But again, it was also part of me surviving prison. But for the first 10, 15 years, I was involved in the politics. I was involved in incidents on the yard. I took trips to the hole and spent months back there at a time. I had no identity. I was being who I thought these people around me wanted me to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I thought I was never going to get out of prison. And a lot of people succumb to that belief, like, this is my life. I got to make something of myself in here.
Yeah. Because you originally you were in for life, correct?
Yeah.
Because this is before the whole parole thing.
I was sentenced to 25 to life with the possibility of parole after 17 years. But I sat back during those 17 years leading up to my parole hearing, my initial parole hearing, watching every single person I know go to the parole board and get denied. I didn't know one single person that walked out of prison that was doing a life sentence. So at that time, life meant life, not just an undetermined amount of time. Fortunately, things started changing around 2007. 2008, you started hearing about lifers. Hey, I heard this guy over on this yard paroled, and I heard so and so went home. And you wanted to believe it, but it seemed so impossible given the situation we were in. You know, I know politics had a lot to do with it. Most guys doing a life sentence will favor a Democrat before they'll favor a Republican, just based on the Republicans' points of view against lifers in the state of California. Yep. You know, that had a lot to do with Governor Wilson and Gray Davis. They made it really, really hopeless to do a life sentence. And during that hopelessness, okay, and going back to our last conversation, I'm still dealing with the baggage from my life on the streets. Yep. And unfortunately, I turned to addiction. You know, I turned to alcohol when I was on the streets, not knowing how to deal with what I was dealing with. And there's alcohol in prison. It just takes 3 or 4 or 5 days to make it. Yeah. But heroin's readily available. And it was really ironic because heroin was what my dad chose to take his life with. So I would swear up and down I would never touch heroin. Yeah. Like that was the enemy. And peer pressure. Drugs are a big part of the economy in prison. And over the years, you know, it's hard for family to constantly be there for you and to help you. You know, your family could send you money. They could send you packages. And for some situations, a person doing 2, 3, 4 years, maybe their family can sustain that. You know, but when you're getting into 15, 20, 25 years, you know, that's pretty heavy on the pocket. You know, and so there was times when, you know, my family couldn't look out. They couldn't take care of me. And I would get involved in things on the yard to try to make money. And during the course of that, I did succumb to addiction. And in my ignorance, I believed that my addiction to heroin cured my alcoholism. I no longer want to drink. So this is a good thing. Yeah. And like I said, in my ignorance. But it was really around 2010. I was just at my lowest. Like my self-esteem was nothing. I was so tired of the everyday monotony of prison, trying to sustain an addiction in a confined environment. And I was good at being an inmate. You know, I shouldn't even say that. I was good at being a convict. I was good at getting the things I needed in prison to make my life as comfortable as possible. And again, hopeless. So I had no reason to think other than what I'm doing today is what I need to be doing.
I guess what year or when did you think like I got to make a change, or you started believing that you could get paroled?
Well, my change started in 2010, and I remember the exact moment. I had been up for about 2 weeks, high, the whole time. I mean, very minimal sleep during this 2 weeks. And at the time, you know, prison's about 10 years behind on everything in society. So we were still using portable CD players in 2010, where everyone else was on to MP3s or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I had a CD from a band called Drowning Pool. And there was a song called Let the Bodies Hit the Floor. Right? Yeah. So I love that song. But during this 2-week period, I had it on repeat over and over and over. And it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was in an open dorm environment, which means it's basically like a building the size of a garage at your house that has 4 or 5 different bunk beds in it. And you could walk in and out of it at night and go to the restroom, which is down the tier. You know, you no longer have a cell door on your door. You're medium to low custody. Mm-hmm. You know, there's still officers there to watch you, but you're a little more trusted. Mm-hmm. And I was listening to this song, and I there's a part of the song where he's like, something's got to give. Something's got to give. And that just clicked in my mind, like, something's got to give. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't want to be a drug addict in prison. This isn't who I'm supposed to be. But the hope of getting out of prison isn't really for me yet. Like, it hadn't resonated with me that I could get out. I see people getting out, but I mean, these are people that are way better than I am, that have worked on themselves and know who they are, you know. And I just said, you know what, this has got to stop. I can't do this no more. And I walked inside the bathroom and I lit a cigarette. and they took lighters from us. So we used to make lighters with 2 AA batteries and some razor blades. Right? You flip one over, you connect the ground on the bottom, and you touch the razor blades, and they glow red. You could light a cigarette. So I lit the cigarette, and I looked on the little windowsill, and everyone used to put the razor blades on the windowsill. And I decided I was going to grab a razor blade and I was going to cut my wrist. This is the way I was going to end this. And I reached for the razor blade, and you know when you rub your feet on the carpet and you touch someone, you get shocked?
Yeah.
That little static electricity charge. Well, for whatever reason, when I reached for that razor blade, it shocked me. And it just snapped me out of it. Like, what the fuck am I doing? Yeah. Like, this isn't an option. But in the back of my mind during my whole life sentence, that was always an option. Because there's things you learn from your parents. And my father showed me that there's always a way out if you need there to be. So I kind of checked myself, and I broke down, and I went back to my bed area, and I was like, I'm just done. I'm done. I'm not going to kill myself, but I'm done. And the next day, I went to the substance abuse program that was on our yard. And I talked to the officer. His name was Officer Howard. And to this day, I wish that I could hug this man to this day for the love he showed me as a person. I told him that you know, I needed to get in SAP. I needed to get clean, and I wanted to work on me. And he said, give me your name and number. And I wrote it down for him. He said, okay. And a week later, I was assigned to that drug treatment program. And at first, I was like, I can't do this. I seen people getting up talking about traumas that they suffered as a kid. And I'm like, oh, no. We don't talk about that. Yeah. No, I seen people allowing themselves to be vulnerable in the hopes that they could find something to help them heal. And I did the program. I graduated the program in my class, valedictorian, which sounds crazy that they have a valedictorian in prison, but these are little affirmations that they give people to make them feel better about the work they're doing. And I had gotten that award or honor in my class, and I found that I was terrified to leave the program. Like, my time is up here. I don't want to go back out to that yard. I know what's out on that yard, and I feel so safe. Like, the SAP program has no idea the solitude it gives a person away from prison. Like, when you're in that program, you don't feel like you're locked up. You feel like a human being. You feel like I get to make choices, and I get to be who I'm supposed to be instead of who I need to be. And I asked him if I could come back as a volunteer. I was like, I don't want to be out on that yard. Like, really what it was I didn't have the confidence to go back into the belly of the beast and still fight my addiction. I wasn't self-assured yet. I doubted.
Did you kind of caught me where you talked about others in that group talking about their, you know, their childhood traumas or kind of getting into their emotions? And I know, I know as like having brothers, I have a lot of brothers. I have 5. I kind of grew up around a lot of men in my family. And one thing that's always stood out is like them not talking about their emotions. Like, that is not allowed. Like, you talk about it, you look weak. You're not supposed to cry. You're not supposed to show emotions. You're not supposed to talk about your feelings. Did you actually end up talking about your emotions? Did it help you?
So when I went back as a volunteer, you get involved in the groups, but you're looked upon to be a little more of kind of like a lead in a group or a co in the group to the counselor, because you've been through this, you know where this is going. So you're looked to be the example. And I still felt like there was a lot of baggage that I had. Like, I could feel the weight of my baggage. And one day I walked inside the counselor's office and I was like, okay, so I got all these fucking insecurities and these issues. Now, what the hell do I do with them? Right? And he just started laughing. So he tells me to write about them. And I said, write about them to who? He says, write about them to your dad. At the time, I was 36 years old. And that's the age my father was when he committed suicide. And it was huge for me to be 36 years old because this is where my dad got to. And now I'm as old as my father was when he left. And it was like almost acknowledging that the rest of this journey is mine. You know, because I can't ever expect my father to give me something more than what he had himself. And he only lived to be 36. So this one, the rest is on me. So I wrote my dad a letter. And it was about a 3 or 4 page letter. I didn't even think all that would come out. Like, I just put pen to paper and didn't stop. And 3 or 4 pages was gone. But I still felt a little bit of baggage. And I went into group the next day and I asked the group if I could read my letter. And I read my letter. And by the time I was done reading my letter, there wasn't a single dry eye in the room, including my own. But I just felt the biggest weight lifted off my shoulders. Like, I finally understood. I finally got it. Like, I was finally free, you know? And from there, it just snowballed. Like, my recovery just snowballed after that. Like, I was just developing this understanding of who I was. And I was learning these principles and I was internalizing them. And next thing you know, I'm holding people in my group accountable. Like, no, like, why are you doing this? Like, why aren't you paying attention to your triggers? Why aren't using your relapse prevention plan? And I just got really, I felt really comfortable in the field of recovery. And then they eventually asked me to work in the program. They have inmate mentors that act as co-facilitators and counselors. And I started doing that in 2010. And I did that for the next 10 years.